Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tuesday, March 30th, 2010 meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency. Mr. Kasakian, could you call the roll, please?
Agency members: Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Draymond.
Here. And could we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the March 30th, 2010 regular meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, March 25th, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you very much. Our first item?
Approval of minutes.
Second.
Do we have anybody out?
I will abstain from these minutes.
And was that the only abstention? I think.
Yes.
All right. Then with that abstention, the minutes will stand approved as submitted. And our next item?
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited time. Is not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Redevelopment Agency may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. And the matter may be referred to staff through the Executive Director for investigation and report.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. We have one speaker card, Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, Redevelopment Chair Raymond, members of the Redevelopment Agency and city staff. My name is Herbert Milano.
It's very cozy up here, isn't it? We're all so
It is,
close.
you know,
It's
like
hot, isn't it?
I can almost smell the aftershave.
Or whatever, yes.
Whatever. One of the goals of redevelopment, from all the documents that I've seen, it's the economic revitalization of an area, and particularly the employment opportunities that it engenders. But I wonder if the Redevelopment Agency has ever followed up to see how many jobs were generated or provided to Glendale residents from the Americana brand and any of the other projects that you have assisted or funded. I am particularly interested in how many people of zip code 91205 have been hired or have jobs now at the Americana. It would be interesting to see a validation of any projections concerning here's a project that is going to revitalize the downtown area and the city, and here are the jobs that were created, and here are the number of employees that were, that were hired out of these needed areas. I know my daughter has some of her friends who work at some of the shops there, so I know that there are Glendale residents obviously working there. But I think it's important to look at area code 91205 because it's so proximate to these redevelopment areas. And second, because the median household income is $35,000. Notice that I said median household income. I didn't say average. Because average can be exceedingly misleading. And when people decide to use averages, then it becomes, you don't know how skewed the particular information is or what period of time it is actually covering. And that is it addresses part of the problem that I've basically mentioned many times before. Sometimes when you make decisions and you receive information or data or an analysis, oftentimes that analysis is not comprehensive, it's not thorough, or it's not clear enough. So I'm very leery when someone comes back and says, no, here are these averages, without giving you the full picture. So when you have a project such as the Americana and you have certain goals and objectives, should we not come back to what those objectives were and measure them to say, were they accomplished with regard to jobs or employment, tax information, additional income, and so forth? Because I think it merits for us to go back to those projects and the intent of those projects and evaluate them. Did it actually fulfill our requirements? Or did it draw employment from someplace else? And now you find other shops closing and they move into that particular area, which I think has happened. So I think it is time to really evaluate thoroughly all of the objectives of the Americana. It was a huge deal for the city of Glendale. And let's find out if the projections are really being met. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Mr. City Manager, do we have numbers, by the way? Or do we even have access to numbers?
Well, I'm not...
that is employment numbers as to what number of Glendale residents are currently employed at projects like not just Americana, but projects like Americana. Whatever it would be a snapshot at that particular moment, of course. But
A couple of things. Let me say that when Mr. Milano raises this about every quarter as if we haven't done an evaluation of the Americana and looked at its numbers, and yet, as you know, we have on several occasions since that center has opened. So you have done that. Whether employment data on current employees is available, I don't know. We might have something through our workforce development group, but that could be data that could be pretty difficult to assemble. But
Yeah,
I don't know. Phil, are you aware of anything?
I'm not sure from individual tenants that we can get that information, that we have access to it. What the Verdugo Job Center has are large numbers and mixing people, different demographics. What I will say is, as part of that agreement, you negotiated with Caruso Affiliated to include a jobs program where they would advertise to Glendale residents and try and promote employment to Glendale residents. In fact, beyond Caruso Affiliated, many of the tenants used our Verdugo Job Center and many of their clients. Now, the Verdugo Job Center serves both Glendale, Pasadena, and I think La Cañada. Burbank. I'm sorry, you're correct. And so many of their clients went through interviews, and I can't remember at the time if we had a number, how many were hired, but since a year has passed, and I don't know that we could go back and get that information. I'm not even sure that I'm remembering we had some count, but I'm not sure that we actually had a specific number.
You have anything to add, or?
I'd only add that we can always ask Caruso Affiliated if they have any information they're willing to share. I will say the job fairs that we held, I know they were successful, and Caruso's initial employees at the center, a large number of those were through our job fairs that we held right here at our job center on Central. So,
Okay. Thank you very much. Our next item, please.
Next item on the business agenda is Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding Alex Theater Quarterly Report presented by Glendale Arts for fiscal year 2009-2010 for the second quarter period of October 1st to December 31st, 2009, and status report on capital improvement projects for the forecourt redesign and digital mixing sound console.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to our Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing. You need your glasses to make out the title on your. Can you hold that up, Mr. Lansfame? I don't know if the camera can get that. It's gotten so tiny as the name of the agency has changed. The department has changed.
it was either that or pay for a larger sign. We didn't want to pay for a larger sign.
Well, you know, we've had a lot of sign issues come through here in recent weeks. It's just easier to say, Mr. Lansfame, it's all yours.
CRH. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Agency. There is some Alex Theater business here. We've combined 2 or 3 items. I'd like to invite Deputy Director Emil Tatavosian to present this item to you.
Mr. Chair, members of the agency, the report before you has 4 action items associated with it. The first is the quarterly report from Glendale Arts for the period of October to December. Mr. Barry McComb will do that portion of the presentation. The next 3 items have to do with capital improvement projects. The first item on that list is a change order for $26,400. The staff report should be corrected before you. It's got an erroneous number. It should actually read a change order in the amount of $26,400. Then the next item associated with the forecourt is an authorization to proceed with the preparation of the construction documents once the design is completed. And the last action item has to do with the sound system. I will provide you further details on the last 3 items, then ask Mr. McComb to come forward and address the quarterly report. In terms of the forecourt project, you may recall that back in 2007, the agency approved a long list of capital improvement and maintenance projects for the Alex Theater. And these 2 projects were included on that list, specifically the forecourt and the sound system. The forecourt item had a budget allocation of about $150,000 at the time, but the scope of the project wasn't pinned down, it wasn't discussed, it was just a placeholder of $150,000. As the designer got on board and further discussions were held by the theater staff as well as Glendale Arts, and understanding the potential of revisiting the forecourt and understanding what could be done to recapture the magic of that space, not just in terms of how it serves the theater, but also in terms of generating additional income, the scope of work grew. Basically, working together with the design team and the Historic Preservation Commission and also the Alex team, the idea is to create an ante-room, more of an outdoors room for before and after functions, and also functions by itself, such as a performance space or a space for a daytime meeting space or meeting use. As such, the scope of service for the design team grew, and we're asking for an additional amount of $26,400, which brings the contract amount for Architectural Resources Group to about $73,000. The concept design was presented to the Historic Preservation Commission in January. It was positively received. They had a few specific design-related questions that hadn't been ironed out at the time. We plan on going back in May with the revised and final design. Once the HPC's approval has been received, we are asking authorization to continue preparing or to start preparing the construction documents, then releasing those for bidding purposes, and we'll come before you to award the construction contract. The project budget hasn't been finalized at this time, but we are certain it's going to cost more than $150,000, given the expanded scope of work. However, over the last 2 years since the adoption of the 2007 list, many of the projects that have been implemented have actually witnessed cost savings. So we're hoping that the additional cost of the forecourt will be offset by the cost savings, so that additional funding would be necessary. The next item, the next maintenance-related item, is the sound console upgrade. That project was actually started in 2008, and if you have specific questions, Barry could probably answer that effort better than I can. But my understanding is that was a multi-phase effort, and it all has to do with bringing the theater to a state-of-the-art sound system, not only to make the space appealing to the patrons, but also increase its rentable capacity opportunities. This line item has a $70,000 associated with it. Initially, we had budgeted $50,000 in the 2007 capital improvements list. However, we do have money in our Alex Theater funds to pay the additional $20,000, and the difference will be offset by the Glendale Arts and their contribution towards future capital improvement projects. If you have no questions about my portion, I can turn it over to Barry, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Quintero.
I do have questions, although maybe Barry can also answer them. In terms of the design, it's also an ability to have a performance, somewhat of a...
If you
on a mini...
Yes, Mayor Quintero, if you look at the Exhibit 2 that's attached to the report, although these aren't the final drawings, these are basic concept drawings, and if you look at the portion that's in front of the lobby, which would be towards the
Mr. Tadabosian.
Thank you. Towards the left.
Mr. Tadabosian. Mr. McComb's sitting right behind you.
No problem.
You might.
But I think I have a pretty good grasp on the design. But I was just losing my direction in terms of where north is. Towards the west, not necessarily on the design, but towards the west of the theater, where the existing entrance to the lobby is. That area is sort of being designed to allow for outdoor performance, potentially a more intimate outdoor performance in that area.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. Then
And
also,
since we're talking about design, if I may interrupt, one of the biggest and probably the most cost-consuming, most expensive component of the design or the construction effort is going to be the resurfacing of the forecourt. Currently, it's sloped, very inconvenient for people dressed up in heels and sort of at an evening function to be standing in a sloped courtyard. The idea is to level it out, but introduce ADA compliant side ramps, but also allows for an elevated platform, which is conducive to potentially a lower performance space.
and another question, would there also be the ability, I've been there at times in the winter when it's just so cold and we're trying to have a sort of outdoor function, would this layout also give you the ability to do some sort of tenting, some sort of canopy? Or?
Absolutely. The center portion of the drawing, the ADA ramps are to the north and south of the space. The center portion is where you actually rise through a set of steps to arrive to. That area is potentially going to be receiving some heating units as well as shade structure. What's complicated with the shade structure is blocking view to the historic facade, but yet provide enough shade when you're in the space. At the same time, provide heating units there that could be removable when it's not necessary during the summertime.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking in terms of something temporary. I don't think
Right.
it should be. It should absolutely be an open courtyard. 95% of the time, it works well. But I like it. It looks great.
All right. Mr. Weaver, and then...
I'd like to
Mr.
ask
Weaver.
Barry McComb, I thought that sometime I read there were going to be a retractable cover to go over the courtyard area for bright sun, or in the winter when it's cold, it would help in a way to...
Mr. Chair, members of the agency, that was one of the ideas that we have we continue to investigate, a retractable shade device that when it's fully open or operable to provide shading doesn't block view to the historic facade. There are several fire life safety issues when you have a shading structure that covers the entire space. So we're looking at opportunities where we can provide enough shade strategically without requiring fire sprinklers or having it so high up that defeats the purpose of providing a shade at a lower height. We're dealing with code issues. We continue to struggle with some code issues given the tight space.
Can't see where the big problem would be if it's fire treated, fire resistant. I've been at plenty of events there on hot afternoons, and you're literally sweating when you're out there waiting to get inside. So
Yeah, we're trying to not compromise and just end up with some umbrellas. So we're exploring all opportunities we have.
I can't
that
see the
serves-
umbrellas.
Right.
They take up space and they hide views
Right.
too. I'd like to be kept, I'm sure we all are, appraised of the efforts to have the retractable.
At the risk of potentially going somewhere that we may potentially not be able to accomplish, we're looking at temporary shading device in the center area where it's temporary. Poles are brought in, an attractive shade structure is installed, then taken down. We're looking at not only design but also the cost of
So you're going to
putting
keep
it
us
up and
appraised
taking
on
it.
all
Right.
types?
All those issues are being tested, talked
They'll
about.
be coming back to us.
Yes, definitely. And to the HPC.
All right. Ms. Friedman.
Yes, thanks. I'm glad to see the forecourt project moving forward because it's something that'll help the city utilize this great asset in the Alex Theater. And I think at some point down the line also help the Alex be able to become more financially solvent as they can rent the space out. I did have a question, and I'm sorry if you just haven't gotten there yet, about the sound mixing. And my question, I don't know how to ask it delicately, so I'll just ask it. Is this something that we really need? What is having the old or the current sound mixer doing that having the newer one would allow us to do better, or why can't we live without it?
Members of the agency, if you don't mind, maybe I can turn over to Barry. This is the area of his expertise, and he can probably provide a better answer to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Barry McComb, the Executive Director of Glendale Arts. In answer to your question, Councilperson Friedman, the current sound mixing council that we have now has been there since 1993. So it's very outdated when compared to what traveling performance groups are expecting to find when they come in. What has happened on numerous occasions is when groups have come in, then promoters have had to rent that equipment from outside and actually not utilize our board. What that does is then increase the cost of renting our facility and puts us, in many cases, out of line from a cost standpoint of similar venues that have similar systems. The big change that's happened is back when the theater was first opened in '93, everything was an analog board. Much bigger, a lot more knobs that have to be controlled, a lot more components that can go out on you. Now we're in the digital age, and the board that we'll be purchasing is actually a digital mixing board. When a traveling artist comes in, they will actually have their mix on a disc that they will put into the board, and it presets all the levels for them. The other thing that's always been an issue for us is our mixing console is located at the side on the second story of the theater. Traditionally, a mixing console should have been on the main floor back in the center so that the sound engineer has the best opportunity to properly balance the mix in the theater. The other thing that this board will allow us to do is, because it's digital, our sound engineer will have a tablet that he basically can walk any place in the theater during a show and change the mix of the show from that position. So it will actually provide us with a lot more flexibility to immediately address sound issues that sometimes come up during shows.
So the short answer is yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Najarian?
No.
I have a couple.
I did have one other.
Mr. Weaver?
Since Barry's up there. I'm trying to find it. I read somewhere that people go out. There's 4 places they listed, the top 4 where they'd like to go. I think one was the Hollywood Bowl, the Greek Theater, the Wiltern, and fourth in line was the Alex Theater in Glendale. Surprising to.
Actually, what you're referring to is the Fox 11 TV hot list.
Oh yeah, that was.
Yes. And we were actually voted number 4 by the people that responded to that survey. Actually, last year we were voted number 1.
We were?
We came in first. This year we came in 4th, but if you compare us to those 4 venues, certainly we're in good company. And I think a portion of that is just because as the mix of programming changes at the Alex, we're drawing people from a wider area in to see some of the shows we've done recently, the John Cleese's, Joan Osborne's, people like that. Nellie McKay, who is performing at the Alex Sunday night. By kind of broadening the awareness that we're there, obviously once you come to the Alex, it's a wonderful spot to see a show. It's a very intimate venue. The acoustics are good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. McComb. I don't know if you even know this, Mr. Lanzafame. I was one of those community folk recruited by your predecessor after the city had, after the purchase of the Alex, to help with the, give input and consult on the historic elements of the Alex. And in those days we were talking about things like the removal of the concrete from the entryway up to the entrance of the theater, things like that. This is a historic site, Mr. McComb. So this changes to the forecourt. Does that in any way compromise the historic elements of the theater?
Actually, as our architect group will get into when they actually bring the final design forward to you, they're trying to come up with a design that's complementary to what some might say are 2 competing architectural styles, the Marquis and Art Deco, and of course
Right.
the theater. To actually try to take the forecourt back to its original historic look would be very difficult because at one point there was a set of stores that were going down the south end side, which now is down Kuko's, and then we had a large fountain that was on the north side. So we're trying to come up with a plan that, number 1, makes it more conducive to a wider variety of uses, while still remaining true to the historical architectural elements. And as you'll see in the real specific design pieces of the new forecourt design, they're pulling very minute details from kind of both side ends of the forecourt into the forecourt design, so there's a nice kind of transition. We are doing a water feature, which we believe is very important to bring in there to kind of bring that sense that we wanted. But number 1, it doesn't make sense doing it on the north side because number 1, it's in the sun all the time, which then we have issues with water evaporation. 2, another component that we're doing is adding a ADA compliant box office window that will be just inside the forecourt gates, which means the north side of the forecourt will be our primary ADA entry into the theater. So we have to have a rail that goes up that side as well. Don't really want to have a rail going across your water feature. So we're trying to be very aware of the historic elements. We've gotten some positive feedback on the design from members of the historic community. The one nice thing that will be a piece of the forecourt is we're going to be adding donor walls in the forecourt itself. We're planning next fall to launch what we're calling a legacy campaign to basically help create an endowment for the Alex so that there's an assurance that it will be here for generations to come, and those donor panels that will be included in the forecourt will basically be the centerpiece of that campaign. I might also mention I was just recently contacted by the daughter of the person that the Alex Theater was named after.
Alexander?
Langley. So her grandfather was the person that built the theater who named the Alex Theater after her father. And she currently lives back east, and we're hoping to actually have her come out as part of the kickoff of our legacy campaign.
And for those of you that don't know, the name was not the Alex.
That's correct.
Alexander. So, so in short, the answer is what you propose is not going to compromise the this historic elements of the.
We've been very careful not to try to create a false sense of history in our design.
I'll take that as a no.
That's a no.
Okay. Wow.
Politically correct, no.
Okay. And then the proposed changes, though, affect more than just the forecourt. I mean, what we're used to seeing now with the gates in the front and so on, that would change as well, correct?
That's actually one of the remaining challenges for us. In order for us to really utilize the space the way that we want to, we need to be able to block out the street noise. And those of you who have attended receptions there, when the traffic's heavy, I mean, it's sometimes very difficult to understand what people are saying during events. And we've looked at a variety of different options. We're starting to focus down on one that we hope will make more sense. There certainly are some code issues we have to deal with, but we do believe that we have a solution in sight that we're in the process now of vetting out.
Okay. All right.
And actually, that solution will make a more elegant entry into the forecourt to bring you into the theater.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McComb. Don't go too far because we do have a speaker card, and you never know.
Right.
Okay. Our speaker is Herbert Milano, item 6A, which is, I presume, somewhere in 6A, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pardon me? 3.
Thank you. Redevelopment Chair Draymond, members of the Redevelopment Agency, my name is Herbert Milano. I've always held the Alex as well as one of the gems in the city of Glendale. It's just an outstanding venue, and it's so, definitely worthwhile preserving and encouraging its use. I happen to know one of the architects who worked on the upgrade back in the 1990s. He was a friend of mine. But I want to bring up a couple of issues with regard to how the information is being presented. I know that with the downturn in the economy, we would expect a downturn in the attendance to practically any theater. And I know that the agency justifies these expenditures based upon the overall economic impact that all these additional patrons bring to the city of Glendale. I just wondered if there has ever been a study with regard to validating how many people go to restaurants and so forth after the shows, and if we have anything tangible that we could use to measure. It would be nice to sort of validate that with regard to the investment that the city is making.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. In fact, there are some studies, Mr. McComb, if you'd like to. First, let me interrupt to say you're talking about the forecourt, and if we're talking about, Mr. McComb, cutting back, are we going to cut back 4 quarts? That's a gallon. Are we going to cut back to a half gallon or 3 quarts or?
That's a pun.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
The city of Glendale actually was very fortunate because a national organization called the Americans for the Arts chose Glendale as one of several communities across the country to conduct a study on the economic impact of the arts. They've actually been here twice. I think the last survey was actually 2007 or maybe 2008. And spent quite a bit of time collecting data on how much people did spend when they came to arts-related events in the city. And the dollar figure that study, the latest study, revealed was that the average patron spends $19.98 in addition to the cost of admission when they attend an event in Glendale. Certainly, probably the majority of that is by going out to restaurants, certainly shopping, and few cases, hotel, parking, etc. So if you really look at those numbers, when the Alex Theater's attendance is back to normal levels, which for us is around 150,000 people a year, that alone is a $3 million impact by bringing people through the door. In addition to that, in a standard year, we maintain a budget of close to $2 million, of which over $1 million of that is salaries and wages being paid out, which of course is reinvested back in the community. There are taxes that are paid through the purchases that we make locally in the community. So I think it's more realistic to say that our annual economic impact is probably around $4 to $4.5 million for the annual operation of the theater. And certainly that will just continue to grow as we have more opportunities to promote the arts in Glendale at the Alex Theater and other venues, as well as create new opportunities for use at the Alex, such as the forecourt.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Is there any other discussion on these items from the agency?
I have a
Mr.
question
Najarian.
of a financial matter. The Alex has grown its reserve to $115,000.
No, actually, at the end of the second quarter, our reserve accounts, cash reserve accounts, are running $115,000 ahead of last year. So we actually have in direct reserve accounts right now probably closer to about $250,000.
Okay, so what do we do with that money? And is that something that the Alex Board exclusively determines? When do you decide to spend yours versus coming to us for, the design of the forecourt and the other soundboard issues and things like that?
It's actually split into several different funds which are governed by the terms of our management agreement with the city. We have a general reserve fund which is supposed to be built up to $100,000 for the Alex Theater. We're right at that right now. In addition, we also have a capital and maintenance fund that once we surpass the $100,000, any additional money above that will go into the capital maintenance fund. There's also money going into that periodically. And we do use that to supplement projects that we come to the city to ask you to help fund. Actually, in the sound system, we put $75,000 towards Phase 2 of it. We actually are faced with having to refurbish the rigging of the stage this summer, which is going to have a price tag of $42,000 attached to it. Rather than come to the agency to ask for funding for that project, we're funding that internally out of that fund. And then the third fund is a programming fund, which is there to help kind of remove the risk factor of Glendale Arts bringing programs to the Alex Theater. So if we do a show at the Alex Theater and it loses money, then the loss is covered out of that fund. The benefit to the Alex, obviously, is it increases activities to the theater and takes the financial risk that we had suffered in years past. And, programs used to lose $300,000 a year, which is really what put the Alex in such a tough spot. I think right now we've got about $75,000 sitting in the programming fund. We've, out of all the programs we've done this year, we've had to touch it once. Everything else has proved profitable for us.
So talking about Glendale Arts has been successful so far. I see they had some very successful bookings. And
Glendale Arts is growing slowly but surely. We're kind of faced with this perfect storm in arts funding right now, which is, government grants are down, foundation grants are down, individual giving's down, and obviously ticket sales are down. So we've been going forward with a very kind of measured pace. Probably our biggest project that we're about to launch is the new Glendale Renaissance Orchestra, which is actually a project of Glendale Arts, meaning that the cost and revenue for that project is running through us. We are hopeful that within a year or two that organization will grow strong enough to where we can kind of cut the apron strings and they'll become their own freestanding entity. But at least for the next couple of years, we're carrying the financial responsibility for that. So we've put a lot of our efforts into ensuring that the launch of the Renaissance Orchestra, actually later next month, will be successful and it will start to have a good solid base to move forward.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, on that note, your contract with them is, 2 years?
Actually, with the Glendale Renaissance Orchestra, it falls under us until we as a board decide that it's strong enough to go out on its own. So it's basically a project of our 501c3, and we're overseeing it through a fiscal.
Are you saying it's open-ended?
The contract is open-ended.
Contract is open-ended.
Yeah, but we're operating as a fiscal sponsorship.
What connection does Caruso Affiliated have to?
Besides, in an official capacity, none other than obviously Rick Lemmel, who is their VP of Community Relations, is heading up the executive committee of the Renaissance Orchestra, has played a very pivotal role. Certainly, we are receiving support at a variety of levels from the Americana, since some of the performances will be taking place at the Americana. And to be quite honest, I don't think in this environment we could successfully launch a project such as this without the Americana's involvement and support.
And so the performances will be split?
There'll be some at the Americana and some at the Alex. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, just a note on that. The Glendale Renaissance Orchestra will pay rent to the theater as though they were anybody else using that. And the hope is that they can grow the program to provide more shows at the Alex Theater as well as the Americana to help revitalize Mid-Brand and get benefit up in those areas as well.
And if I make a point, I think something that's very important is when Glendale Arts does a presentation at the Alex Theater, such as a John Cleese, we pay rent and the same rate card fees as any other promoter off the street. So when we do a show that's successful there, it's not only successful as a booking for the Alex Theater, it's successful for Glendale Arts as an independent promoter turning a profit after paying all the Alex Theater costs. So there's kind of a double benefit when we do programs there.
Mr. Quintero.
Are the rates the same, whether it's a nonprofit entity or private for profit?
We do have nonprofit rates, so
You
there
do
is a
have
cheaper,
two
which is
tiered.
strictly off of rent. It's not off of reimbursable labor fees and whatnot because those are hard costs. We've also, in an effort to try to increase business, we've come up with packages. So for midweek days, which are the tougher days to rent, we now have a special rate if you have a show that's only going to utilize the orchestra level of the auditorium. We have a special rate if you're doing a film screening, a special rate if you're a business meeting. So we've tried to take our soft times and to come up with more streamlined packages in an effort to draw additional business. And there's been many promoters who have taken advantage of those packages this year so far.
All right. Mr. Kasakian.
Mr. Chair and members, if I can read the actions now that are before you. At 1 is a motion to note and file the quarterly report. At 2 is a motion approving change order to the professional services agreement with Architectural Resources Group in an amount of $65,330 for the forecourt redesign project for a new not-to-exceed contract amount of $112,175, including contingency.
Artie, that motion is amended pursuant to Emil's presentation. The ARG amount will be $26,400 for the Alex Regional Theater forecourt redesign, with a new project total not to exceed $73,400.
Thank you.
As amended.
As amended. At 3 is resolution authorizing the preparation of specifications and preparation of bid documents and solicitation of bids. At 4 is motion authorizing the purchase of digital mixing sound console in an amount not to exceed $70,000.
Thank you, Mr. Kasakian, and I apologize for moving on to the presentation before you had a chance to read that into the record. Mr. Weaver, yes?
Housekeeping? All those motions?
Did you have an accident?
Everything go at one time?
All right. Yes.
You can just note for the record that 6A2 as amended.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Mr. Freeman, I'd like to move 6A1, 2, 3, and 4
I'll second.
as amended.
And
I'll second it.
all right, we have a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, Mr. Kasakian, if you call the roll, please.
Agency members Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Draymond.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. McComb. Thank you, Mr. Tadebosi.
Any agency member or staff comments?
Mr. Najarian.
I do. I think we all got notice that they were filming a commercial last week at the vacant lot, Orange and Wilson and Brand, where the Meridian Hotel is slated to go up.
Did they enjoy the accommodations?
I think they did. I know agency member Friedman was there also earlier in the day. They were very happy that she had taken time to visit. They were happy to see another agency member / council member. And they were very, very complimentary on Glendale's attitude and all the staff from police, fire, clerk's office in terms of facilitating their production shoot. So that's just I don't know how much they paid. Well, it's not our land anyway. I'm sure there were some permit fees that we were able to access, but they were very happy and pleasantly so, and they promised they would keep Glendale in mind next time they were doing some shooting. They were doing a Chevy truck commercial, and I guess the scenario was that a bunch of kids are playing soccer in a dirt lot amidst this urban backdrop, and in comes some developers, and the kids are afraid their beloved soccer field is going to go away, but in come the guys on their Chevy trucks and they lay down a sod field, and I guess they played some soccer, and it was very entertaining for a newbie like myself to see a production underway.
That is our new program, by the way. That's our new redevelopment program, Mr. Quintero.
Yeah, they actually said that the commercial was going to be shown in Latin America and for the World Cup, since Chevy, General Motors sells trucks across the world. In talking to the location company, one of the things they mentioned that I think is a very good idea, they said that the redevelopment, whoever is going to be in charge of it, we should put together what they call the FAM trip, familiarization trip, where we could actually contact and they'd be willing to help us. We could contact a number of different location companies, put them all together in a bus, and just literally drive them around the city of Glendale to give them a feel for the different neighborhoods and the different possible locations where they could film. I thought that was a good idea. That might be something that's worth, whether Ken Hitz does it or whoever does it, but it might be something worth pursuing so we can actually, because I verbally was describing some of the neighborhoods. One of the owners, or at least employees, lives in Glendale, but the other one wasn't that familiar. I talked about Chevy Chase, talked about my mid-century neighborhood, the Northwest, all the different, of course, Montrose. So I think that's a good idea. We should see about putting a FAM trip.
Mr. Kasakian.
I want to thank you for your comments. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I know that redevelopment, our community redevelopment and housing agency is working diligently on helping promote Glendale as a filming location and looking at new ways of doing that. I just want to express publicly that we're grateful for any company that films here in Glendale, given the amount of jobs in the entertainment industry that help pay people's salaries who live, work, and raise their families in this area. We appreciate shows like Criminal Minds that has an excellent relationship with our office that gives out the permits, along with any company that does commercials, whether it's for Latin American television or any TV outlet. So we'd like to actually request that at one point, whether it's through this body or through the council, we recognize some of these companies who have made an effort to keep filming here in the Southland, because some of them have really made an effort to film here in Glendale, and we want them to keep coming back.
Anyone else? Okay, I don't hear any other agency or staff comments. Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Thank you, colleagues on the agency. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you.